Man, you need some new stickers for the back of your truck. Scott Horton here for LibertyStickers.com. Aren't you sick and tired of everyone else being wrong about everything all the time? Well, now you can tell them all what's right with some stickers from LibertyStickers.com. At LibertyStickers.com, they're against everything, so you know they're good on your issue, too. Whether it's the wars, police, state, gun laws, the left and right, or the president, LibertyStickers.com has hundreds of choices so you can find just the right words to express your opposition and contempt for those who would violate your rights. That's LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck. All right, you guys, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. This is my show, The Scott Horton Show. And our guest today is Jacob Hornberger. He's the founder and the president of the Future Freedom Foundation. Welcome back to the show, Jacob. How you doing?
Fine. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be back.
Well, good times. Happy to have you here. Hey, so you and Sheldon Richman are on a speaking tour around the Northeast, correct?
That's correct.
All right, so tell us, where all are you going, and the dates and times and all these things?
Well, yeah, we're doing it in conjunction with the Young Americans for Liberty, and their local chapters at the schools we're visiting are putting together the event, the venue, promoting it, and so forth. And we've already done Monday and Tuesday, and tonight we're going to Binghamton University in Binghamton, New York. So if anybody's in that area, come out and see us tonight. It's at the lecture hall on campus, and that'll be at 7 o'clock. And then tomorrow night we're going to be at the University of Albany. And then the following night, Friday night, which is the last leg of our tour, is at the University of Vermont in Burlington, Vermont. So, yeah, we're having a blast. I mean, we're just, we're taking our Libertarian Angle internet show that we do every Monday. We're taking it live, and so we have a spontaneous conversation between Sheldon and myself for 30 minutes, and then we involve the audience in the conversation where they have input, questions, answers, comments. So it's really a nice little analysis of libertarian issues and applying them to the burning issues of the day. We're showing these kids that the only real practical thing is to advocate pure, uncompromising libertarian solutions, and that they ought to go beyond these reform things that we always hear from conservatives and start talking about restoring a genuine free society to our land by dismantling all this status junk.
Cool. Well, so, hey, I know you've been doing this a long time. FFF, you founded back in 89, right?
That's right. This is about 25 years now.
So tell me about the difference in going and talking to young people like this. Is it... Are the numbers that much more? Are they that much more educated, or has anything changed, really?
Oh, it's a sea change. I mean, when we started in the movement, when I started in the movement 25 years ago, it was a relatively small movement. And, you could barely find any college kids that were interested in this. I was, several years later in the 80s, I was program director at the Foundation for Economic Education. And even then, there were some kids that would come to our seminars, but mostly it's because their parents sent them there or their grandparents or something. But what we're seeing now is kids that are really, really have this fire in the belly for libertarianism, and they believe in it passionately, and they're self-educated because they're not getting educated on like Austrian economics and libertarianism in college, obviously. And so we're showing up at these events, and they've read Mises and Hayek, and they know Bastiat and Hazlitt, and it's incredible. I mean, we already have common ground to have conversations with, but it's clear that what they're doing is studying in the summertime or studying on weekends on things that they're passionate about that obviously they're not getting any credit in school for. And so I can't tell you how impressive it is. I mean, that's why we're on this tour, is to kind of, ignite fires within these kids and kind of transmit our passion for this philosophy to them, but also to raise their vision to a higher level because, there's so many people that just advocate reform, like Obamacare. We got to get rid of Obamacare, but they don't go to the root of the problem, and that is Medicare, Medicaid, government intervention, licensure, and so forth. So what our aim in this tour is to raise their vision to a higher level and say, look, we got to talk in terms of dismantling Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and not phase them out, but just repealing them. And of course, the national security state, the giant military empire, CIA, NSA. We hit it all, Scott, with within a half hour in a conversation between Sheldon and me, we pretty much hit the basics and the application of the basics. And by the time the hour is over, there are a few libertarian subjects that we haven't covered, believe it or not.
Man, that's great. And you post at least some of these online at the videos on YouTube and at fff.org too, right?
Well, our weekly meetings where Sheldon and I get together and talk about libertarian principles and apply them to what's going on in the world today, those are all online. People
Right.
they're on YouTube, and you can just go access those. These that we're doing here with these groups, we're not videotaping. So you can't get those. You have to come to the event and get them live if you want to participate.
I see. Well, maybe you could do that thing like you do with your journal articles and hold them for a couple of months, and that way you still encourage people to come on out. But then also later on, we can watch them. Those of us who couldn't possibly make it to Vermont for your show on Friday.
Yeah, well, what we found is, it's so expensive to videotape events, and then we figured there's more spontaneity when people know they're not being recorded. There's just more of a casualness, freer about what they say. And so we figured since it's an academic environment, people, we thought we'd make it more of a discussion, and people don't have to worry about, I'm going to be on tape, or what if I make a fool of myself with my question, all that sort of thing that goes on at a program.
Well, let me ask you this. Well, first, let me say this, then I'll ask you something. When I gave that speech at your event, at the Students for Liberty event there in February, John Glazer's part of the talk was the libertarian part, and mine was the more empire part. But, he really emphasized in his speech, and I think he had told me, and we had talked about how important he thought it was to really focus on this in this way, because he feels like in Washington, D.C., these kids are a lot more kind of young Republican-y, and they're not very radical. They might be radical on Medicare and Medicaid and stuff like that they couldn't possibly need, that kind of thing, but they're not nearly as versed in or concerned with matters of the national security state and civil liberties and that kind of stuff, which, of course, is ranks as first priority to me, although bankruptcy and all that could be pretty bad for peace and liberty all the way around too. Don't get me wrong about the other stuff, but I wonder if that's your experience, that maybe a lot of these kids, they come from the right, they're kind of fiscal conservative, but they really need whooping into shape to really make libertarians out of them.
I don't think there's any doubt about it. Because they're like all the rest of us. We discovered libertarianism, I think, mostly through economics, maybe through the drug war. But very few are exposed to the libertarian case on foreign policy, empire, civil liberties, and that we consider that, or I do, I consider this a much graver threat to our freedom and our well-being than the welfare state. And that was a big eye-opener to me when I finally realized what the Founding Fathers were concerned about, why they opposed standing armies, and that danger exists to this day. President Eisenhower warned us about the military-industrial complex as a threat to our democratic processes, and that threat has not diminished. In fact, it's grown. And these kids would not be exposed to this type of thinking because we all grow up with this idea that the national security state is part of a free society, that, in fact, our freedom is owed to the CIA and the NSA and the giant military, that they're out there protecting our freedoms, a force for freedom, And it's the exact opposite, and that's what our objective is, to come in and say, look, there's reasons why the Founding Fathers of this country opposed this kind of way of life. And even if you buy it as part of the Cold War syndrome, which was the justification for this radical change in direction, as Eisenhower pointed out in his farewell speech, the Cold War ended. And so what are we still doing with NATO and military bases all over the world and regime change operations and sanctions and all this stuff? Well, most of the crises that they use to justify this are caused by them or provoked by them. And so that's what our objective is here, is to raise the vision of these kids. And even if they don't agree with us, it's not really important that they agree with us, but we're over there saying, here is something to consider. And if they never hear the idea, Scott, then they're never going to consider it. And our objective is, hey, let's let's plant the idea there, and then they can decide for themselves whether it's a good one or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of times, a lot of insight can be gained just by confusing somebody and then letting them work it out for themselves. I remember Anthony Gregory, who writes for FFF.org, by the way, and for the Future Freedom. He told me one time about a speech that he gave where a kid came up to him after and said, "But wait, so I'm still confused. You're against taxes and prisons?" And Anthony said, "Well, yeah, of course. No taxes, no prisons. No prisons, no taxes." And the kid just, his mind's just blown because here, Anthony is more right-wing than the right-wing on everything they're good on, and he's more left-wing than the left-wing on everything they're good on. And it's, libertarianism, puritanical libertarianism walking, right? Pure libertarianism, Richmanian libertarianism. And so I think, where you can surprise people that, wow, so Jacob, it sounds like you hate Medicaid, but then you're telling me you hate Empire more than you hate Medicaid? And people they don't know what to do with that until, hopefully once you explain yourself, they kind of realize that, oh, I'm living in a world where people actually think some things I'd never quite considered before, but sound like they make a lot more sense maybe than what I have been hearing all this time.
Right, and especially at the college level, where kids are figuring out, what their philosophy is, what their guiding light is, what they were born to do. They're trying to figure out what they want to do with the rest of their lives. And that is the academic experience, to be exposed to all kinds of different ideas and go back to your dorm and debate them and argue them and whatever, even if you haven't made up your mind. And so that's why we love to come to these campuses, because there's an intellectual honesty there that the kids are generally interested in principles. Principles matter, and ideas matter, and ideals matter to them. And life hasn't battered them into conformity yet. And so we sit here and say, okay, here's the libertarian paradigm. And again, we don't expect a total agreement, 100% agreement, although we get it with some of the libertarians that have studied this stuff. But to me, it's like tonight. The organizer told me, hey, I've invited a bunch of people that don't necessarily agree with libertarianism. They don't really understand it. They're curious. And I said, fantastic.
Great, yeah.
I mean, that makes for an exciting, presentation and discussion when you got people that don't necessarily agree with you. And it's fun.
All right, and again, that one is tonight at Binghamton University in Binghamton, New York, at the lecture hall there. We got to go out to this break. When we get back, we're going to talk with Jacob a little bit more about his tour with Sheldon Richman around the Northeast this week. And we're also going to talk about Michael Swanson's book, The War State. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this. Hey, y'all, Scott here. Ever wanted to help support the show and own silver at the same time? Well, a friend of mine, libertarian activist Arlo Pignatti, has invented the alternative currency with the most promise of them all. QR Silver Commodity Discs, the first ever QR code 1-ounce silver pieces. Just scan the back of one with your phone and get the instant spot price. They're perfect for saving or spending at the market. And anyone who donates $100 or more to the Scott Horton Show at scotthorton.org/donate gets one. That's scotthorton.org/donate. And if you'd like to learn and order more, send them a message at commoditydiscs.com or check them out on Facebook at /commoditydiscs. And thanks. All right, you guys, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. This is my show, The Scott Horton Show. On the line, I got Jacob Hornberger. He's the founder and the president of the Future of Freedom Foundation at fff.org and fff.org/subscribe for their monthly journal, The Future of Freedom. And again, he and Sheldon Richman, editor of The Future of Freedom, are going to be doing a talk tonight at Binghamton University in Binghamton, New York, at the lecture hall there. And tomorrow they'll be at the University of Albany, and on Friday they'll be at the University of Vermont. So look into that. Check out your Young Americans for Liberty chapters, etc. If you can get nearby any of those places, or if you're a student at any of those universities, go and meet Jacob Hornberger and Sheldon Richman in person and ask them really hard questions like, what's so great about the book The War State by Michael Swanson anyway, Jacob?
Oh, it's one of the most awesome books I've ever read in this area. I mean, that somebody that wants to understand the origins of the warfare state that under which we've all been born and raised, this is the book. I mean, I'll never forget when I got the book in the mail. I didn't even know who Mike Swanson was. And I often get books from authors, as part of our work at the Future of Freedom Foundation. And I'll thumb through them, but most of them are kind of like not our cup of tea. They've got call for reform or vouchers or something. And, if something isn't pure and uncompromising, we won't review it, we won't promote it or anything. So I thought, well, this is just one of those standard books, and so I'd never heard of it. So I started thumbing through it, looked at the table of contents, and I said, oh my gosh. And I started looking more carefully, and I said, wow. So I took it home and read it, and I couldn't put it down. It was just this absolutely fantastic presentation of how we got the warfare state, primarily since World War II. And it opened up with Eisenhower's farewell address that I mentioned earlier. But it gives the whole roots of it, the consequences of it, how it turned our country into effectively a garrison state. We ended up adopting totalitarian methods that even live to this day, torture, assassination, and Swanson puts it all together. And so we ultimately met, and we got to be friends, and it's just been a real joy to get to know this guy. He's actually an investment advisor. And he's a historian. He went to the University of Virginia. He either got his master's or he's studying for his PhD or both or something. And so he really knows his history, and he knows how to research. And he's done just this fantastic job with this book. I couldn't recommend it highly enough. In fact, it was the lead article in our monthly journal, Future of Freedom.
Right, and that article is now on the website. It was published today on the regular part of the articles section at fff.org. It's The Origins of America's Warfare State by Jacob Hornberger, the review of The War State by Michael Swanson here. And so I guess, can you tell us, were there any surprises in there, or anything unique that you learned, say, about the Eisenhower era that you didn't really understand before that he helped clarify, or something that you think really stands out that people ought to be aware of, that, to kind of, because, I got to tell you, man, I was born in 1976, and I grew up in the Ronald Reagan kind of brinksmanship, renewed Cold War kind of after détente and all that era, and it's just always been the case my entire existence that America garrisons the planet, that the president reigns supreme. He is our leader and all of this stuff. And you're telling me that this is all artificial from, post-World War II. But the problem is World War II was so long before I was born. 30 years before I was born, it was over. So, maybe that's just the way it is now. I don't know. You're always trying to say that this is alien. It should be considered alien to our system, but maybe it's not. I don't know. Maybe did I set you up for a good answer there somewhere?
Yeah, nothing sticks out in Swanson's book as something really special that sticks out. What I saw is that here is a guy that recognizes that this is not the standard American way of life in which our country was founded, that there really is a remarkable shift. I guess something that does stand out, where he says between World War I and World War II, despite the fact that Americans had adopted an income tax in 1913, here they had gone most of the first century of America's existence without any income taxation. You made it, you kept it, you decided what to do with it, because there was no welfare programs either, like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Well, so the income tax adopted in 1913. I was stunned to read when he says that between the two wars, World War I and World War II, a very small minority of people were paying income taxes. I think he was like 2.5% or 3% or something like that. That it was imposed just on the rich, which of course we libertarians would oppose. We oppose all taxation, but especially income taxation. But then after World War II, when the military says, "Oh, look, we know we had to build up this huge military force to fight the Nazis, but oh, by the way, now you have to keep it as a permanent part of American life to fight our new enemy, the Soviet Union, which had been our partner in World War II." And so you've got this big Cold War thing that the communists are coming to get us. And then the income tax starts getting imposed on everybody. to the point of where it is today, where even the poorest people are suffering under the burden of this huge tax on the IRS. And I think that was a stunner. But what's really remarkable about this book is he just puts it all together in a really readable format. I mean, this isn't your academic tome that's difficult to get through. It's just for the regular person, what I call the educated layman, who is interested in knowing how we got to where we are today with this huge military empire and the CIA and the NSA. But he doesn't delve much into the NSA or the CIA. It's really the military empire that he deals with, which is one of the three components of the national security state. But it's a fantastic summary of how we got to where we are today.
It's really interesting to me to read about Eisenhower's quarrels with the military and how even when he did win, he just barely won. And you can kind of, when you listen to his farewell speech after reading The War State, you can kind of feel the tone of voice a little bit better there, where he's really coming from, where he's tired after 8 years of battling these guys. And, of course, Eisenhower's version of battling them was to try to limit the size of the army and just make more hydrogen bombs and do more CIA coup d'etats. That was the limited empire under Ike before the real brinksmanship started, you know what I mean? And the real arms buildups of the Democrats that came after him. But, you know, it just portrays even Eisenhower as maybe the cowboy grappling to the hydrogen bomb from Dr. Strangelove, but no more than that. The beast is way bigger even than the supreme Allied commander of World War II at that point, by the time he's the president of the United States.
Yeah, and I think we need to keep in mind that he wasn't just a passive actor in this, that he's the guy that approves the Mossadegh plan, where the CIA is going in there to oust the democratically appointed prime minister of an independent country, and he's the one that puts his stamp of approval on it. And then 1 year later, he puts his stamp of approval on doing the exact same thing in Guatemala. And so, it's not like he was just saying, well, I oppose this and I'm fighting with the military and the CIA over this. This guy was going along with it. Now, granted, it may have been the CIA that was coming up with the ideas. Certainly they had come up with the Iranian coup before Eisenhower got to power. Truman had nixed it, and then the CIA comes back and presents it as an anti-communist plan to Eisenhower, and he goes along with it. So, and he's there for the big buildup of this huge military empire. So he buys into the whole Cold War, the communists are coming to get us and so forth. And he buys into the Truman Doctrine, where we have to keep the communists out of every country in the world. And so then after 8 years of this, he says, oh, by the way, I want to warn you guys of how dangerous this is to our democratic processes. Well, why didn't he do that at the beginning? Why didn't he just say, look, this is all a crock? We're not going to sacrifice our freedoms. We're not going to sacrifice our principles. We're going to fight communism with a free society, rather than by adopting the policies that are inherent to totalitarian regimes.
Right, especially because he was Ike. So in that whole only Nixon can go to China sense, he should have been able to tell the American people, hey, listen, we got a real problem here, and I need you guys to back me on this. And the American people would have absolutely backed him. If anyone in American society had the ability to face down the empire that he'd inherited from Harry Truman, it would have been Ike Eisenhower, and he just didn't do it.
Absolutely. He had the total credibility as head of Allied forces, Army general, revered by the American people. He would have been the guy that say, we're not going down this militarist road. We are going to fight this totalitarianism by a free society, and we're going to show the world that this is the way you do it, instead of embargoes on Cuba and invasions at the Bay of Pigs and so forth. And the other interesting thing about this is that, he gave a fairly free hand to the CIA. He didn't try to rein them in. He didn't try to control me. He just put Allen Dulles in charge, and he sort of let them do their own thing. So by the time Kennedy comes into power, that was one of the things they hated Kennedy for, is that Kennedy was putting tight controls on the CIA all of a sudden. He was reining them in. In fact, he even threatened to tear the CIA into 1,000 pieces. He didn't like the CIA, and they didn't like that at all. They really expected Nixon to be elected, and Nixon was Eisenhower's vice president, so they saw this sort of continuity. And all of a sudden, Kennedy gets elected, and their attitude is, who are you to come and control us? We've lived 8 years of running the show ourselves.
Yeah, well, he shouldn't have kept them at all. Maybe that was his problem. He should have fired every last one of them upon taking office. Anyway.
Yeah, well, he fires Dulles. He fires Dulles' right-hand man, and then another guy that he transfers out of there. So, to fire practically the founder of the CIA. Dulles was this revered figure. That was huge. But what he really should have done was present to the American people why the CIA needed to be abolished at this point. And he did threaten to tear them into 1,000 pieces, which to me is saying, I'm gonna take away all your power. And they knew that that's what he was aiming at, and yet he leaves it in existence, and we've got this monstrosity still today.
Well, I've always been a real skeptic about they killed him because he was an angel theory, but I think that Swanson certainly has done the most out of anyone to convince me that after the Cuban Missile Crisis, he really did decide that he had to do something to limit what these guys were doing. And I don't know if he was really going to get out of Vietnam or if it was the test ban treaty he was pushing or whatever it was that pushed them over the edge. And again, I'm not exactly certain who hired the hitmen who fired the shot or whatever, but I do think, I guess I'd concede that Swanson has convinced me that even if JFK started out as a Clinton or an Obama, that maybe he started going a little Kucinich there toward the end. I don't know. I'm still a little skeptical.
Oh, there you go. It's a dramatic shift. It's an absolutely dramatic shift, and the mainstream historians are now recognizing it. They denied it for so many years, but after Kennedy knew, and so did Khrushchev, that the Cuban Missile Crisis brought us to the very edge of extinction with all-out nuclear war. And in fact, if Kennedy had followed what the military wanted him to do during the Cuban Missile Crisis, we wouldn't be standing today. They were telling him, go in there and bomb and invade, and what they didn't know was the commanders on the ground had battlefield authority to use nuclear weapons, which they had. And so an invasion or a bombing would have resulted in nuclear missiles being fired immediately. And so after that, Kennedy recognizes he's got this soul search, and he says, my gosh, I came so close. So he has this secret correspondence going on with Khrushchev, and Khrushchev's going through the same soul searching, and they're saying, let's end this. Let's end the Cold War. Let's live like today we live with Vietnam, and we live with China, Cuba. There's communist countries, but there's no antagonism. There's no hatred and anger like there was during the Cold War. That's what Kennedy was aiming for with Khrushchev, and that's what scared the death out of the military-industrial complex and the national security state, because their position was, you can't trust the communists. You can't reach a deal where you're going to disarm, because the communists are just lulling you into existence, and they were looking at this thing, we're going to go to war. At some point, we're going to go to war, and Kennedy was effectively disarming America and surrendering.
Yeah. All right, well, I'm sorry we got to leave it there, but I've already kept you more than half an hour, and I got to go because Clive Stafford Smith is next about America's torture regime here. So thank you very much for your time, Jacob.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, so that's Jacob Hornberger, everybody. He's a founder and the president of the Future Freedom Foundation. Go and see him and Sheldon Richman speak. Go to fff.org for more details. They're in Binghamton, New York tonight.
The military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced
Hey,
power
Scott Horton here.
exists.
I'd like for you to
And
read
will
this
persist.
book, The War State by Michael Swanson. America's always gone to war a lot, though in older times it would disarm for a bit between each one. But in World War II, the U.S. built a military and intelligence apparatus so large it ended up reducing the former constitutional government to an almost ceremonial role and converting our economy into an engine of destruction. In The War State, Michael Swanson does a great job of telling the sordid history of the rise of this national security state, relying on important first-hand source material, but writing for you and me. Find out how Ike, JFK, and LBJ all alternately empowered and fought to control this imperial beast, and how we've gotten to where we are today, bankrupt, corrupt, soaked in blood, despised by the world. The War State by Michael Swanson, available at Amazon.com and Audible.com. Just click the logo in the right margin at ScottHorton.org or check out Mike's own site, thewarstate.com. Hey, y'all, Sky here. First, I want to take a second to thank all the show's listeners, sponsors, and supporters for helping make this show what it is. I literally couldn't do it without you. And now I want to tell you about the newest way to help support the show. Whenever you shop at Amazon.com, stop by ScottHorton.org first, and just click the Amazon logo on the right side of the page. That way the show will get a kickback from Amazon's end of the sale. It won't cost you an extra cent. And it's not just books. Amazon.com sells just about everything in the world, except cars, I think. So whatever you need, they've got it. Just click the Amazon logo on the right side of the page at ScottHorton.org or go to ScottHorton.org/Amazon. Oh, John Kerry's Mideast peace talks have gone nowhere. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. U.S. military and financial support for Israel's permanent occupations of the West Bank and Gaza Strip is immoral, and it threatens national security by helping generate terrorist attacks against our country. And face it, it's bad for Israel, too. Without our unlimited support, they would have much more incentive to reach a lasting peace with their neighbors. It's past time for us to make our government stop making matters worse. Help support CNI at councilforthenationalinterest.org. Hey y'all, Scott Horton here for WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson knows his stuff. He made a killing running his own hedge fund and always gets out of the stock market before the government-generated bubbles pop, which is, by the way, what he's doing right now, selling all his stocks and betting on gold and commodities. Sign up at WallStreetWindow.com and get real-time updates from Mike on all his market moves. It's hard to know how to protect your savings and earn a good return in an economy like this. Mike Swanson can help. Follow along on paper and see for yourself. WallStreetWindow.com.